Hello, folks. I'm Darian Kachalun. Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Good, and you?
Good.
Hello.
Okay. So yeah, we have our next chapter, like chapter 8, and unfortunately, the presenter, he says he will not be able to present. So it will be next week, right? Today we have Darren on our yeah. So next week, the chapter 8, if anyone is open. I don't know, Catalonia. If you sorry, maybe if I pronounce the name wrongly. What is the best name to call Mayang?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, sorry. So I don't know if I can see you have started looking at the chapter. If you are fine to walk also through chapter 8, I don't know. If not, maybe someone can lead us to the next chapter.
Yeah.
All right.
Hello.
In the chapter 8. Yeah.
Sorry, you say what?
Yeah, I just looked at the chapter 8, but let's keep it for
Open.
next week. I think so. Who will be taking the lead on this?
Oh, the next week we have next week, which is chapter 8. But the person that will be leading sent me an email, because when we share this book club, he already put his name that he will present the chapter, and I told him, hey, week after next, that is next week, you will present the chapter, and he said he is not available, he cannot present. So yeah, I mean, anyone in this group feel free to pick up the chapter 8 for the next fine for you. All right. So, Darren, what we get today?
Well, it'll be pretty informal, but I'll just sort of have I'm going to walk us through, I guess, mostly just my experience with using GPT-3 for different NLP tasks. So let me share my screen. I'll just show the whole thing. Let me see where we are. Okay, you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any big questions anybody has that I can try to answer immediately? Or should I, because I don't want to just go into it and just be talking. I mean, is there anything on top of people's heads that I can try to answer? Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But as I walk you guys through this, any burning questions, concerns, thoughts? So just shout them out as I go along, if not.
Great.
One thing. So I'll just show very simply how to access the playground where you can develop your prompts, and this is sort of how you get started and start building your NLP application or process, sub-processes, or whatever you're going to do. And so OpenAI, I'm sure you guys have all heard of OpenAI. Some of you have probably actually been to the playground. One thing to note is, people are always worried about costs and expenses. Here's the playground. This is where you can put in prompts and see what you get back from it. So you ask GPT-3 to do something and you see what you get back. How can I make this? I want to minimize the, there you go. And so there's GPT-3 now has a limit of 4,000 tokens per call, and that includes your response. So that's actually a pretty large number of tokens, 4,000. And they charge, just so you get a sense of how much you're being charged. Let's go to the pricing. So you saw when you log in, see the login. When you log in, you'll see what I'm showing you now, the playground and that kind of stuff. But here's when I'm just sort of their home page. And I think the pricing is on top here. So here they talk about the pricing. Okay. And they just dropped their pricing in half as of September 1st. So I really strongly recommend, these are in order: Ada, Babbage, Curie, and Da Vinci. Da Vinci is the most recent, the most powerful, also what they call their instructor model. absolutely recommend using DaVinci. And you always start that way, and you try to get something to work with DaVinci, the best of the best. That's why I'm using OpenAPI as well, because out of all of the players, they're absolutely on top with the quality of what you can get out of their model. You start there, and then once you get things to work the way you want, you can work your way backwards and see if cheaper models will work. But to give you a sense of pricing for when you're playing around or just running 10 or even a couple hundred prompts programmatically, it's not a lot. It's not expensive. So 2 cents per 1,000 tokens.
So if you have a short query and a short answer, you can make many of them and still flat. So it's not per call. It's so it's not that for each call you have 4,000 tokens, and if you even if it's a short call, you use up all the 4,000 tokens, or is it that if you have a short query, you just pay for the tokens which you use?
It's the latter. Yeah, it's literally they count tokens.
Okay.
And so you can reformulate your prompts to use fewer and fewer tokens to try to save money and that kind of stuff. And you can that's actually one of the part of the game of it. You could fine tuning. I'll explain a little bit more about that, although I don't have a lot of experience. But when you fine tune a model, I think you can also fine tune it in a way that reduces the number of tokens you use. But Yakov, that's true. I mean, I do most of the stuff. I've never done a prompt. Well, programmatically, I've done a prompt where it's warned me I've been above 4,000 tokens. But in general, I'm using way, way smaller, and I'm paying just sub-cents. So just very quickly, I think the estimate would be 4 characters per token. But more simply, so you can get any document, just count the characters in your IDE or whatever, and then you divide by 4, and then that gives you how many you have. So if you have 1,000 if you have 1,000 tokens because you divide up your characters by 4, then it's going to cost you 2 cents, and more or less. And then the other thing is, if you look at the playground and you're using it, if you can only put in 4, like the biggest prompt you could do is 4,000 tokens. Well, shit, that's what, 8 cents. Right. So you're not going to go over 8 cents per call. That just gives you a rough idea, right? Which is important so you can feel comfortable. I personally don't worry about it at all ever now. I mean, I end up with under $100 charge each month. I charge it to work, so I'm not worried about it, but it's teeny, for learning and playing and doing everything I want. I never worry about it. When you start running programmatically and you get over 10 or 20 prompts you're running at a time or something, then you can start worrying about it. And you could track it all in the GUI. So anyway, are there any questions about just the basics of how you get to the playground or about pricing or anything like that?
Just one question. You can do it from an API as well. What is the average return, the response time? Is it it's the same what you see on the screen, I believe. So it's
I don't know. I really can't tell you because it's slow. I mean, I run things, everything I'm doing are like back-end pre-processing kind of stuff, so I don't worry about the response times very much. But yes, I think it's kind of like what you're seeing on the screen, which is not fast. Okay. And I'll talk about some sort of a general idea of strategizing for that and how you could work your way into faster stuff. So, but the first thing is to get some sense of running prompts and what GPT-3 offers. And they have examples. So let's just look. I don't love all their examples particularly, but some of them are kind of interesting. Okay, so of course the classic one, GPT-3 is amazingly good at summarization. I mean, just amazing. But here's an example they're going to give us. So there's doing TLDR as well, where you just put TL. So here you go, let's summarize this. And you could summarize much longer text, and I do it all the time. All of my Zoom stuff keeps getting in the way because I have such a small screen here. Okay. Okay, so that's a very simplistic example of summarization. And you could do something like this: too long, don't read. See what it does. Usually want to do that for something longer, but okay. So that's an example. I'm not showing you guys anything that's all that exciting right yet, but it's what I want to do is just sort of give you a sense of the variety of tasks you can do. That's the first thing to understand. I don't know. This is a weird one. Let's try this Parsons. This is kind of a weird example, but so from summarization to, so take a look at this. This is some science fiction stuff, and we're trying to get, extract these otherworldly fruit colors and flavors from this. So this is like a, I would call it open information extraction, which is a sort of a traditional NLP task. Okay, so it's actually extracting triples, right? Relationships. This is a form, I would call this a form of information extraction.
Mm-hmm.
So we just went from summarization to information extraction with the same model, just by asking it nicely what we want it to do. So I'll keep showing just a couple more examples, and then I'll talk a little bit about, I'm going to show some papers with code comparing GPT-3 on different tasks. And then I'll show you a couple things I've run, and we'll see where we go from there. But
can I ask a question over here?
Yeah, absolutely.
2 questions. First question is...
Well, I just said one. No, you can ask me 3. Ask me 10, dude. Go for it.
Okay. Question number 1. Is it true that GPT-3 is not specifically trained for these tasks, but it is trained for all the data, and if you put in these prompts, it happens to bring out good answers? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. The only thing it's trained to do, it's an autoregressive, language model with, transformers. So it's the decoder. I mean, that's not part of an encoder-decoder network, but it's just the decoder side. So all it is a traditional language model, really, because it just predicts the next word, and that's what it's trained on. Next word prediction. That's it.
So
on a massive scale.
Okay, then to the next question. So basically, people can discover prompts where it produces good output. So let's say it is quite possible that you can put the prompt which nobody ever thought of, and it produces some reusable output over there. So my question is, besides these examples which we see over here, are there any structured or any collections of which kind of prompts create value? Sort of, how do you discover them?
That's a really good question. So, so it's really a more design than engineering, more liberal arts, more writing skills. And what you try to do is you think about how someone would be saying these things on the internet or on common text, because it's trained. That's why TLDR works, right? So if you're familiar with Reddit, TLDR, that's where that comes from, that too long, don't read. You can use idioms like that. So part of it is like understanding the world of language and text. And then it's like a humanities thing. And then writing the stuff. There are patterns of practice, right? I understand your question. This is spot on.
I asked a slightly different question. I asked the question, if you run out of your own brain, sort of if you have no more ideas, how do you access what other people found?
Right. So I guess that's what I'm trying to explain, is that I found bits and pieces. There's not one place to go that I'm aware of. And basically with prompts, you want to find patterns of practice. I did find one Git repo. I'll have to try to find it again, with someone who had a bunch of examples of prompts they did. There's a guy named David Shapiro who does videos, YouTube videos. I've learned a lot of patterns of practice from him. And then there's also the OpenAI community. And there's also Cohere. There's a couple of these guys that train their own models and make them available. It's not just OpenAI. Cohere is another one. Mm-hmm. And so each of these have communities. I think it's Cohere. I don't know. COH. But anyway, each of these guys have communities. No, that's not it. But anyway, they have communities, and I've read.
Is this colon here?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mean like it's colon
here? Colon after.
What's that?
Colon here.
Okay.
Yeah, it is down. It's down. Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah,
Up.
sorry guys. I use it all the time. I just forgot. Yeah. So these guys, but they have a community. You know, they all have their community, and so yeah, part of the answer to that is you have to look for it and find it. And I've had to figure it all out myself. And I've found it through searching on Google. I found one repo, but also watching David Shapiro and then reading community questions, because someone will say, I'm trying to do this, how should I do it? And other people will chime in and give them help.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I am with being able to answer your question.
Your answer is it's shared with the community and in the open web.
Yes, at this point. And the weird thing is there's no real, it's not like you always have to do this or that. I mean, you can get to the same end like 10 different ways. You could write 10 different prompts to give you almost the same thing. And you can write 2 different prompts where one word is different and you get completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Not completely, but different responses. However, I have found that once you find something that works with a couple of examples and then you run it for like 50 or 100 examples, it's not like it's going all over the place. It's actually fairly consistent and usable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So show us some of the things which you use for your actual work.
Okay, we'll do that. Real quickly, let's look at just so you can get a sense of. So this is papers with code, okay, and this is what this talks about is the GPT-3 and how it ranks on the different tasks with the different data sets, okay, and they call it. See right here, it's a task agnostic model. I guess T5 is too. T5 is trained on, I think T5 might be task agnostic, even though it's a sequence to sequence. So it's probably not the only task agnostic model. So you can see how it performs right here on the different benchmarks. And it's in the top 10 for all of them. It's not always the best one. There's all kinds of stuff. NLI, number 5. Common sense reasoning. It's rating 2, 3, 4, 3, 9. I mean, all these question answer, it's a hell of a variety, right? You see all these things, they're like, and there's number 5 question answer there. And what a sentence completion. Of course, you think it would do the best on that one. It's number 8 there. Of course, language modeling. And then I don't know what multitask understanding is, but it's ranking in those pretty good on some of them. So the point is of this page is you could sort of begin to get a sense of the breadth of the tasks that I was kind of just showing you in the examples.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I just want to show that real quick. So here's the Dave Shapiro guide too. I'll put a bunch of links in afterwards, okay? I'll throw links. But this guy, he does like recursive summarization where he takes Alice in Wonderland and recursively summarizes the whole thing down to one sentence. And then he does all sorts of stuff. He's actually trying to build an AI entity just based on, he's kind of into psychology, but he's building an AI entity based on microservices, each using GPT-3 prompts and each talking with each other. I don't know how interesting that'll be to everybody, but his style, I learned a lot of practices from him, how to do things. Okay, so you want me to show a little bit of what I've done here? I'll show you a couple real simple ones, you guys, okay? Just to get back at this basic NLP stuff. And then I'll show you some interesting, more business-oriented. So for a while, let me see here. Just a couple more basics. This is kind of funny to show how you can use GPT-3 for really basic NLP tasks. So here's a paragraph with no sentence demarcation. Okay, it's actually a task I've seen out there. Right, so I've got a sentence with no periods.
Mm-hmm. At the end, you have one.
Yeah, and I think usually they train statistical models to do this kind of thing. But at the end, yeah, the whole thing, I didn't need that, but it breaks it up into its 2 sentences. Okay, see?
Mm-hmm.
Does a pretty damn good job of it. right? And how did it do that? All I did was ask it. That's it. Yeah, it took a little bit of work to get it to do it, to get the right prompt. Okay. So, the question is how, part of the question, and I'll show you more, I'm going to build on this, but part of the question is they call this in-context learning, and they also call it parameterless learning. So there's no parameters because there's no gradient upgrade, right? But they still consider prompting a type of learning. And somehow the model is learning from what you're giving it. And so the interesting thing is not only can you do like summarization, you could do the type of summarization you want, right? And so in effect, you could summarize things in many different ways. Make it summarize in 1 sentence, in 3 sentences. Make it summarize as if it's an industry analyst. Make it summarize for a 2-year-old. Dumb it down. You could simplify, text simplification type summarization. So you can do all those things, and what you're doing is you're somehow taking this model, and not only is it running a task specific process, but it's actually running a idiosyncratic exactly what you want out of it. So it's almost to me like a super or a sub task, right? So another thing to do is, so it's kind of like you could freeze one of these sub tasks, like simplification, like let's just say there's also sentence simplification, which is sort of can be thought of as another type of summarization. And so you could take a complex sentence and simplify it by prompting and asking to do it. Then what you could do is you could generate thousands of these programmatically, okay? So just to show real quick, here's the code to run this exact prompt I just ran. So that's all you do. You click on this view code, and you have what you need. And so what you do is if you get a prompt that works really well, that you like, you can generate a ton of output. You can then go through it, sift through it, and get rid of some of the, like just even by size, get rid of the outliers of the outputs, the completions. Take a couple hundred of those, and then fine tune your model with it, with human review or without. Human review would be helpful. You only need a couple hundred. And right in GPT-3 and OpenAI's tools, you can then fine tune your model and have your own model. And then when you're using that model, it costs the same as, as the normal 2 cents per character. But the point is, then what you do is you generate a ton of examples, a couple thousand. And then you have your training set, and then you train your summarization model, like we've been doing, right? Like we've been learning about. And so if you do that, and you're basically, so what you're doing with your prompt, in a way, you're creating a sort of a hyper-specific task, and then you're creating a training set out of that. Maybe you have humans review it, and then you fine-tune a transformer model for your particular summarization you did, or your QA task. And so you have this very specific fine-tuned model for what you need to do. And it was all facilitated by using GPT-3 prompting, right? So it's sort of a supply chain. And what I'm calling this is as GPT-3 first NLP, right? So it's even broader. So the idea is if you have a task you're trying to achieve within a company, let's say, around a context, sort of and you're trying to get somewhere, and you need to do like 3 or 4 different things to make it happen involving NLP, just prototype it with GPT-3 and chain them all together, right? So, and I'll show you, I do that. I'm going to show an example of doing this. And then once you've chained all of these together and you proved you can actually get the end result you want, then you circle back around and you say, okay, with this piece, I can actually generate a bunch of output, review it, fine tune, and then take the output of that as a training set. So I can generate my training sets and move this back into a encoder model, a classification encoder model, right? Or a span identification for keyword extraction, or a token classifier for, so you can do entity extraction with GPT-3. You can do keyword extraction. You can do all that stuff. So that's the basic thing I've come to, is that you could use it to prototype an entire supply chain, NLP supply chain. And then you could work your way back into some parts can become more accurate. And then it could also become more, of course, performant as you work your way from a raw prompt into a fine-tuned model with GPT-3 into a encoder or sequence-to-sequence fine-tuned, you know, a fine-tuned model and so forth. So does that make some sense before
I want to have two clarifying questions over here, or three questions. The third question will be, can you just show us one way to walk all of this through, which is extremely exciting. Before that, I want to clarify, understand correctly that what you say is you bootstrap something with GPT-3, which say is very expensive if you talk about amount of data. But in the end, once you see that you're on the right track and you create your training data, you actually can fine-tune a much cheaper model to do your specific task, but it will have good training data which has been created with GPT-3. So I understand you that you're even if you need something which works at high speed, at high volume, you don't have to push all the data through GPT-3. You can bootstrap with GPT-3 your training set, and then you would train cheaper models. Do I understand this correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm proposing. I haven't actually done that, but I've read about people doing it. But I mean, even if you're going to have humans involved in creating your training set, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
think GPT-3 is cheaper than a human to do that? So that you could say you could ask a human to put in the full stops in the sentence and use it as a training set, and it's much faster and cheaper to pay the most expensive GPT-3 to create users training data.
Yeah. And I mean, in some cases you could do it without human intervention, but in other cases you'll do you know, where you have GPT-3 and the human. You just have the humans review them. And in fact, yeah. So I think that's sort of a pattern of practice. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned 3 times the word chaining things together, sort of to take one thing to the other. And this is something which I want to see. Sort of, how can you make a pipeline, a conceptual pipeline where you say, I have a first step, I achieve something, and then I take that into the next step and I achieve something else, and so on. Can you show us in this session, whenever it's good for you, some kind of examples of pipelining things?
Sure, I can explain a simple one. I've got a little more complicated one I can't show you, but I could explain a simple one. Yes. I could explain 2 and show 1. So, right.
Now, if I'm driving off in the wrong direction, just you can keep going. I'm interested in seeing that chaining that sometimes in the call.
Oh, okay, so that's where I wanted to go. So that's good. So I'll describe a new thing that I'm working on, which I'm trying to extract themes from documents. They're IT
things or themes?
Themes, like trending themes. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the top most active documents that our company produces that get the most attention, right, in an industry. We do IT content, tech target. And so what I'm doing, I'm in the middle of doing this though, but what I've come up with so far, like for example, enterprise resource planning, ERP. What are the trends of AI in ERP? And part of the trends is I'm saying, what are people reading the most about on our network for AI in ERP? So what I do is I take top trending documents in ERP that are classified. We have taxonomies. We classify our content very accurately. So I can take the top most active trending documents about artificial intelligence that are in the ERP sector. Okay. So I've got these just 5, 6 documents, 10 documents, whatever. And they're getting a lot of attention from IT professionals. So the chaining part is I'm taking a document, each document individually, trying to find out sort of what the theme is, the summarized theme on AI in it about ERP. And so first thing I do is I do a prompt and I ask it to summarize the AI. What is this document talking about with the AI and ERP? So something like that. And then I get a summary, I try to get a 2-line summary of it, okay? But a 2-line summary is quite reductive, right? so sometimes it's not as interesting as it could be. So what I do is I do a 2-line summary. It says like AI is being used to streamline data entry processes for ERP and data integration across ERP applications, right? Something like that. And then what I do is I do the same document, and I do a second prompt on the same document, and I just say, give me details. I try to have it extract the most interesting details about AI and ERP, and it gives me a bulleted list. And I say I do 5 of them. I make it stop at 5. And so then I take those 2, sort of the very reductive 2-sentence summary and the detailed, extracted details. So it's a little bit more information extraction and summarization, the way I do the prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I do is I put those 2 together, right? And that's my summary of the theme, AI theme in ERP of the document. And then, right, so I've got sort of a very generalist 2 sentences, and then I have details. And then what I do is I ask it to name, so I've done 2 separate prompts on the same document. Then I've concatenated, in Python, I've concatenated those 2. And then what I do is I run another prompt and I say, name this theme. Okay, and then it names it. And then I put those 3 together. So now I have a named theme with a couple sentences and a bunch of details. Okay, and then I actually need to do this for 10 documents. And I do this for 10 documents. And then I take this named theme from each document. I put each one into one as if it's one document, right? So now I have 10 AI and ERP themes, right? That are all named, have 2 sentences, have 5 details. And then I ask GPT-3 to summarize that. I have to do a slightly different prompt to get it to work the way I want. And then I have this very concise but somewhat rich summarization that is these are the AI themes in ERP that are trending on our network. And it'd be a couple sentences, and it like mentions all the different ones, and it's interesting. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the other trending topics in ERP, like IoT. But anyway, so that's an example of chaining, right? So it's not that complicated, but I'm making 2 calls, and then I'm putting the completions from those together. Then I'm asking GPT-3 to name it. And then I'm doing that for a bunch of documents. I'm concatenating all of those. And then I'm asking GPT-3. So it's like going through these, cycles of taking the completions and putting them back to GPT-3, basically. Does that give you some idea of an idea, how you might do chaining?
I want to check was I understand you correctly. So you say in 2 broad strokes, you just summarize the data which you have. But you're saying you're just paying much more attention about how to summarize to produce some valuable, some really interesting output. And to do this, you say you have in parallel at least 2 different lines of summarization. You say summarize very aggressively to give a short summary, a very short summaries, and then produce a longer summary which goes into interesting details. And then you put them together. This is not yet chaining one after the other. This is doing 2 specific things parallel to each other and connecting them together. But then you say you put that back in as input, and you ask, how do you name this theme? Sort of what is the categorization of what you did? And there you actually feed into GPT-3 as input the output which you created before. And that's what I would call chaining. And then how do you do this for and then you say you take the same process for 10 documents, and then you summarize that meta summary for all of them to get one headline for everything.
Yes, and you can imagine, yes, that's right. But it's not like I read this is a specific way to do it. What happens is once you start doing prompting and realize all the variety of things it can do, then you start going, oh, well, I can have it do this. And then once I have this, I can use it again on it to do this. So another crazy example is you can use GPT-3 to expand vocabulary, right? So I can imagine a taxonomy building application where you start with a sentence or a word, you say, give me all of the words related to this word. And then you say, cluster these terms. And then you go through each one of them. So now I have you can recursively build a vocabulary, right? Sort of just like a vocabulary, like 50 words in a subject area, like IoT, right? And then you have all of these words in IoT. And then what you could do is you could have GPT-3 cluster those words. And then you could take each cluster and name the cluster. And then you can just go on and on, feeding it back into itself recursively and do all sorts of crazy things. So you start doing this a little bit, and some things work better than others, but you start doing it, you get a little addicted to it. And then you start coming up with your own ways of doing, like, do this and then feed it back into it and do this, and then combine these three and do that. That's how I can explain it.
Okay, what I understand over here is you saying you're working together with GPT-3. You're thinking with your brain, and you want to create valuable snippets of text, and you're trying to search for the right questions for GPT-3 to bring up sort of his guess, what his opinion about what these are, and often you don't get what you want, so you play around until you find it, and so you get some feeling about how to do that.
Yes.
Can I ask over here two questions? Question number one is that, say, if you do this for one example, that's hands-on work. And say if the question now is when it works, when you found a process for doing this for one example, and then you put it through 3 text or through 100 texts, do you feel that the results are still of a consistent quality, or would you need to play with each specific area or example in order to get some intelligent output?
No, it's consistent quality.
So you're saying that once you discover a way how to ask the right questions, then you can go to quantity at the price of GPT-3. So that it's maybe not millions of sentence of text, but you can run it and it produces good output.
No, well, there's a step in between there. So I'll show you my whole supply chain. I use Notion. You know Notion?
Yes.
And so what I do is I go back and forth from the playground into Notion as I'm writing these prompts, and I take notes and I save them. Okay. And once I get, so it's always, because it's hard going back and forth to keep track of exactly how you worded things. And once I get things that worded well, and I can run it on 3 or 4, prompts, 3 or 4 examples, and it seems to work well, then I go to code. And when I go to code, I have processes. I'm actually running them in a notebook. But what I do is I output. So I have templates, right? I have a bunch of code I write to do this, but I have templates. And then what I do is I run those templates, and I end up with output in the prompt logs, okay? And so you could see logged output, okay, from all this stuff. Here's some from what I've run up there, right? You can actually see. And then what you do is you look at the outputs, and see, this is progressively building these outputs. I'll just show you one so you have some idea of how I do the outputs. So that one's, a little repetitive. These are the details. So this is these are the detail. That's one of the detail ones I ran. But the point is, I'll show you more of them real quick. I'll show you. This is the completion. The rest of it is stuff I put in there. But here's what I got out of that. This is the AI and ERP.
And this is now one output from one text, or is this a combination of 3 or 4?
This is one document. And then when I combine them, I'm going to answer your question though too. Let me see if I have I don't know if I don't have the combination. I'm not quite to that point yet.
It's really exciting.
Yeah. So, but I want to answer your question. So I go to Notion, I work on the playground, I look like this is working pretty well. I run my code, and I get all this output, and the output, then I see there might be issues, and I try to resolve them by iterating on the prompts. Now, the way that I iterate on the prompts, so let's just do one of the fun ones, is I've come up with this way of outputting your text so that you have first of all, your context. This is the document I ran it on. So this is all my own doing. This is not coming out of GPT-3. So here's the metadata I say for the call. So it gives me the context, okay? This is the document. This is how much activity it got on our network. This is the process completion. So this is the final summary of the trend. this is the raw completion. Now I don't do any post-processing, so it's same. So sometimes you post-process on your completion to do things. And then in here, these are my instructions. So I actually literally can, when I've gotten to the point where I like what I'm seeing, and then I run it programmatically and get 20, 50, 100 outputs, I can actually just do this. Because I like, oh, I didn't exactly like the way it answered. And I'll go into GPT, I'll go into here, and I'll go like this. Oops. There you go. So that's the prompt that was run. Mm-hmm. And I usually run it on 0 temperature because I don't want it to make things up. So you'll see that's the main thing I'm concerned with. I'm using DaVinci, 0 temperature. I'm not worrying about any of the other parameters. 0 temperature means more factual, less imaginative. Right? And then I can run it and get my output. I don't know if it's exactly the same. It should be. Let's see. Yeah. Due to providers. See, there you go. And then what I can do is I can start screwing around with it, making it better, right? So I actually sometimes, I do a little bit larger scale. This makes it easier to improve your prompts and get even better results. And then maybe I'll run it again. And then I'll look at those 10 or 20 and then I'll say they're good. And then you're at the point where in terms of at work, I'll tell you there's one, I'm doing this with automatically generating marketing emails for our customers. These marketing emails, where we are now is I've gone through the process as just explained to you. But now next step is to generate like 1,000, and then supposedly we're going to set up an app where people can review these 1,000. And we're going to either do it internally or pay people or a mixture of both, maybe have customers look at it. And we're going to try to identify out of those 1,000, first of all, do they hold up? Second of all, which one are the couple hundred that are the best? And then we'll get out of that, oh, this is viable, and we'll fine tune on the best ones. And then I think will be what you want to get to, right? Yakov, where you can get consistent, valuable output. So I'm in the middle of all this. I don't know exactly how it would turn out. So that's the answer to your question, I think.
Can I ask another question? Say, if you take a task and you get an answer, and if you move into more difficult questions or into more niche topics, now say for instance, do you feel that there are limits of where you can take GPT-3? I explain what is behind my question. I studied mathematics. And if I ask some mathematics questions in the question answers, in some of the ones, I'm not sure whether I tried GPT-3, I see that I get a lot of rubbish out of there because it's very niche. But if I would ask some more questions which are more everyday, the answers seem to be better. So my question is, when you work with that, do you see that you have to stay in the mainstream, or and if you go into more specific areas that sort of you cross a line where things no longer are supported by the depths of the language model, or do you feel that it's consistent for you with the work which you're doing?
Well, I mean, yes, it's very specialized, right? AI and ERP. Now, however, that's not really that specialized because IT software and, it's like huge, right? It's like, so it's actually, it maybe is not a fully popular domain, but it's really not a fully niche domain because there's a lot of stuff out there on it. So I would say that I don't know the answer. I'm going to make a conjecture. First of all, math, forget it. That's a terrible example. I mean, GPT-3 is not really good at that kind of thing. However, if you get like very niche medical areas, yeah, you're probably going to your language is going to become too sparse. Now, the question is one of two things. Can you, it is very sensitive to your prompting, right? The language you use. So the language I give it here in the document is the language it uses in the completion, right? So, and I've actually pushed this pretty far with IT stuff. And so somehow it is domain adapting through the prompt.
So when I hear from you, what I hear from you is saying that if I have a everyday prompt like TL colon LD DL, then it is good on very everyday thing. And it will not go, probably not go down into niches very deeply. But if you are sensitive in your prompting and you ask it in the niche way, then you can go quite deeply down into things which are available on the web, but not top fashion. And you say at some point, if you go into really specific mathematics, then you say, well, if you don't have enough data, then we won't get any results.
Yeah, I mean, this is all conjecture. All I can say is that when I do these marketing emails, I actually match what a person's been reading about to a specific page or blog page or product page on a software vendor site. And that uses it's like security. It's like IoT security. So that's pretty particular language that vendor is using on that page to describe their product, right? It's not mainstream. Mm-hmm. And what I do is, by putting the text from that page in here, I actually ask GPT-2 to write those marketing emails using the language from the page. Like, write a marketing email for an IT professional that is very intriguing and interesting, and that this IT professional has read this page. So you could see I'm actually giving it, it's not just the instruction. I mean, this is part of the instruction, but I'm actually giving it text, right, from that page, or in this case, it's from this document. And it works very well. Now, the question is, I mean, anything IT is not really super niche these days, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff online about it. So I do think when you get, like, if you were dealing with like something specific in the medical field, that language, maybe it bottoms out and it just can't work very well. I don't know. You'll have to take it. But all I'm saying, it will help if you do what I'm doing here, where you put a bunch of the way you want it to talk about. Right. So I don't know. We should put something very niche in here and see if it can summarize it. I'm guessing it might.
I tell you what I feel out of here. I think there are people in the world which think, well, soon we will have artificial intelligence, which is automatically doing everything better than humans. But that's not what you're doing over here. You're really working together with the GPT-3, with the language model, and you're using your brain to drive it in a certain direction, and you're working together with them. So I feel more that you're doing something like extraction and summarization and amplifications, that you say, well, I can look at the text and I can pull out of this text some important observations, and I can ask GPT-3, can you please take these observations and expand it, or can you summarize it? And so you're less trying to make GPT-3 to create something. You are working together with him in sort of, you do a small step and you say, complete that step, make more of it. Or you can ask, what do you find over here? And you then
yes,
you are working together with him. You're not trying it. You're not aiming that the GPT becomes better than you are. You're trying to find a way how you can help each other to achieve, to go into the direction which you want.
Yeah, it's scale. I'm making it scale my brain, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Scaling brain, amplify what you already have. And
yeah, of course, attention. The funny thing is, what are transformers and intention? They're just amplifying the important stuff in the sentence. That's all self-attention really is. So anyway, it's funny that it works on a micro scale and a macro scale. Yes, we figured out a way to pay attention to the right shit. That's the whole trick to NLP anyway, right? And that's what we've come to. So I want to, there's one thing I missed about the chain stuff, right? And about what you're talking about, which is when I'm doing this chaining stuff, I'm actually combining it with traditional NLP too. Or not traditional, but non-GPT-3 NLP. So for example, with the marketing email stuff, let me show you one and I'll talk through it. I'll show you where I'm using like traditional stuff. It's not as big of, oh, what the hell? I don't want to open a Parquet file. Those are my templates. Let's get the logs. Okay, so this is a vendor called Go Secure. Okay, which is a software vendor. They do security software. Sorry, guys. And I've generated this marketing email. See the prompt completion there?
Mm-hmm.
So, hi, Elizabeth. I wanted to reach out to you to introduce you to Go Secure Titan Labs phishing detection and response software. Okay, and then it goes on. Some of the key features of Go Titan software include the ability to detect block caches that threat actors use to bypass anti-phishing defense. Blah blah blah. And then at the end, it's like, if you're interested in learning more, blah blah blah, and it gives a space for the marketer's phone number. So this is a very specific. How did I automatically generate a very, very specific email? And so the thing about this email, it has a number of contexts that I wanted to get into it. One of it is the profile of the individual. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm trying, it uses the name. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the profile right here. Here's the prospect. This is the company the person's from. This is their title. Also, I have the name. I didn't show it here. These are the documents this person read on our network. Those are literally, web pages on our sites that discuss these issues. We have editors, fairly high quality content we write. It's not like spam content. Okay, so I can see what they did. These are the keywords that were extracted out of these titles. So I know this person read these documents. And literally at this point, I'm just doing it from titles. So first thing I do is I ask GPT-3 to extract the keywords from these titles. Okay. And then I go, what I'm calling this is the person's intent. That's what we call it in marketing and stuff. This is this person's intent. They're interested in phishing, cloud, and Kellogg. And those are pretty generic. This is not a very good one. But phishing is important, right? Phishing is very specific. And I read an article on phishing, so that's why it's in there. Now, so I use GPT-3 to extract keywords from titles in order to get a very simplified version of the intent that person has when they're reading on their network. Maybe they're interested in a phishing product, right? And I'm doing this for my Go Secure, this vendor, right? So do they have a phishing product? I don't know. So what I do is I use a proxy service to query Google. And I do site::Go Secure, right? That's the vendor, right? So I've got this software vendor. I'm trying to produce this marketing email for so they can use it to go after prospects. So I take this keyword intent and I run a query, site::GoSecure.net, and I run 3 queries. I run phishing, I run cloud, I run Kellogg, and I'm trying to find a page on their site that talks about one of these intents. Mm-hmm. And I do. And what I do, so then what I do is, this isn't a great example, but sometimes I'll end up with like 5 pages. And I'll go, well, which one do I want to use? Right, so now I've used basically DM25 querying. I've just basically queried Google, right? So I'm using search. I'm just doing the shortcut way by using a proxy that allows me to do it. But I've used GPT-3, then I've used search, then I use similarity. And what I do is I use Balltree, which is a vector similarity. You could do many-to-many similarity very quickly. And so I use expert sentencing coders to embed the queries, each one of these, phishing, cloud, and Kellogg. And then I compare those using Balltree. I compare those with all of the pages that I've returned. In this case, it's only 2. Mm-hmm. And I say, which is the closest similarity? So I'm just trying to find the best single match between the intent of my customer and the web pages I found on the vendor's website, Go Secure. Mm-hmm. And so I just take the single best match I can. So there I'm using, I'm using embeddings, I'm using expert, I'm using similarity, and I'm trying to find. So there's an example of a non-GPT-3 NLP technique that's part of my chain, right? My chain of prompting and so forth. And then once I have that page, I use that page in my prompt. So here's the prompt down here, okay? Mm-hmm. This is the prompt I'm using to generate that marketing email. This prompt is not, there's a template for this prompt. So I can use this for any vendor I want, right? This is not like I wrote a prompt for Go Secure for one vendor. This works for all of our vendors. This is not a prompt for this particular prospect. It works for all prospects. So what I do, you could see that I substitute stuff in here. So I try to make it, so I'm asking it to do what I want it to do up top here. I'm substituting, let me see here, specific prompt will love, emphasize the value proposition of the software product, solve customers' needs. So here I put in the person's name, information, and then I put in the web page. So here's what I'm talking about. That's the language. I want it to use very specific language that the vendor uses. And so that's actually, I crawled the page, extracted the text. So then I'm using web crawling as part of this chain too. And then, so that's basically what I do. That's the whole thing. I actually use different, sometimes I can only use the web home page. And so because I can't match to anything, to a person's intent, it's too specific for that vendor. And when I use the vendor's homepage, I use a different prompt. So I also have sort of, in this chain, I have template selection where you can select the appropriate prompt for a homepage. And I do something slightly different for home pages. Seems simple, yeah.
Do I guess correctly that that email was not created fully automatically? You still had one person driving that process, sort of to decide that in this example for this person, you want to select 3 pages, and then you want to use that specific prompt. It is still one person making this decision for this particular customer.
No, there's no human in here. This is all done automatically.
It's not only that you have this individual steps automatically, but so you're saying that you could have 3 customers, 3 potential customers, and you wouldn't know what their names are and so on. This comes out fully automatically out the email.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes, this is the prompt. I mean, I can run the prompt for you.
No, my question is, the question is that it's in some case you say you don't no. Do you have for your vendor, sort of if your customer does not have specific emails, specific pages on their website, so you have to decide not to use that prompt but a different prompt. So your process says if you don't find specific pages, then switch to another prompt?
Yeah, so it's very simple. It's, you know, I have a little regex that tells me whether or not the top chosen URL from the vendor site, is that a home page or not. Okay. So then I actually know it's a home page, and I just have a little switch in my, I can show you my code folder. So I think we've talked long enough about all this stuff. But the thing is, yeah, it's all fully automated. So the reason I wanted to show you that, it's first of all, it's interesting to see that you can create marketing, automatically create language that's very rich in a particular type of language. That is the vendor's language. You know, they're selling a product, and you can really get it to use the words they use, the way they talk. And the other thing is to show that chaining, prompt chaining is not just about prompts, it's also about using similarity and using query, and, you know, whatever you could do, you just throw it all together one after the other. And you have
how long did it take you to create that one process? Is it something which you do in weeks and months?
Well, so first of all, it was so much fun that I lost track of time. I have no idea. But yeah, the other thing is, you know, that whole, like that new one I'm working on with the themes, I could spend like full time a week on one of these.
Full time a week, and so you get a process which works automatically, and you still have to supervise it sometimes. But it works most of the time.
Yeah, I don't supervise it at all. But what it is it's in a day to a week, you can create this entire NLP supply chain, right? Of generating whatever you're trying to get to. It's a proof of concept, right? And you can show if it's going to work with this, I know we can make it work. And then you could show it to people. And then you iterate. And well, that's not exactly this. That's how I came up with the idea, because I showed something I did to my supervisor, and he was like, well, we should see if we can get a page from the website so we can make it very vendor specific. So the part of this is the whole lesson of iteration
Mm-hmm.
and the whole lesson of failure in AI. And that people do large projects, take a lot of money, they end up with nothing and it fails. Well, this is a bit of a model of being able to fit an NLP pipeline of sorts, where you chain together different techniques to fit and solve a specific business need. And you can iterate on it within a week, get it up and running, and output the data like I showed you, or to a spreadsheet, or put it into Streamlit or something like that, a real easy, low-code way of getting a proof of concept, and then get feedback, and then go back and redo your supply chain. And then once you have it doing what you want and show you can do what you want, then you can do some real earnest NLP work where you're trying to scale this and move things around. So that's the vision I see for this stuff. And it's fun as hell to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
very, very great.
Now, just to make one more point is, I have, so far, this has been very successful. I don't know, we're running A/B testing on it now, but I've also been able to, we do large scale promotion of content syndication for our customers. So Go Secure will give us a white paper and we email it out to, you know, our readership, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. We have stuff, machine learning stuff, but we target, you know, so many hundred a day. But anyway, the point is, we have a team of people that intake these white papers that we run marketing campaigns on our network with. And when they intake them, they have to write summaries and they have to write subject lines. And they have these guidelines to how to write these subject lines so people will open the things, right? To get someone to open a white paper in an email that's sent to you. And so I took those guidelines and I turned them into 5 different prompts that can write 5 different types of subject lines. Okay, so we currently do this manually and we have years and years of it. So I did that, and then I randomly choose from those 5 different types, like fear of missing out, like action verb, using an action verb, whatever. So I took their instructions that they're using manually, I codified them into prompts, and then I put it together and I generated 5 subject lines that they could use for this document. And then the guy I'm doing this for, he took 5 subject lines for the same white paper, and he used the ones that we actually wrote for it, okay? And then what he did is he put that in front of like a handful of these folks and said, choose the best subject line. And they were all mixed in. And 50% of the time they chose the GPT-3, right? So they literally could not tell the difference between the fucking subject lines they wrote and the subject lines that GPT-3 wrote for these. So now we're A/B testing. So there's no huge complex supply chain here, right? And we're A/B testing on our network now, and I should know within a month whether we can start using these subject lines and automatically generating subject lines, and then we'll go after abstracts next. That's my hope. So I think that's the bulk of what I want to talk about.
Extremely exciting. Now, one thing that I see over here, you need a lot of sort of, if I would do this work for you, not being an expert in subject expert in advertising, not knowing the sort of, if I wouldn't have access to people who have written the summaries before and the headlines before, then I would not be able to make to push GPT-3 to do that. Sort of, you're translating human knowledge into a work together with GPT-3. So it's really working together. It's not okay. At the end, you're replacing the human who is writing that new headline for the next articles, but you're going through this learning process with him, and you're trying to work with GPT-3 to get to learn the same lessons. So it's
it's actually
deep.
I'm helping Rise of the Machines, dude. I mean, it's not only I'm doing it, I'm working with domain experts to, you know, to eliminate a piece of the job. And there's many ways to think about that. So we're collaborating, trying to screw ourselves. However, the other way to think about it is these folks, well, especially, you know, in the US, but globally, there is a real lack of skilled people. So So it's coming at the same time like the baby boomer generation, and there's a big demographic shift in the first world countries. So it's going to help those people do. I mean, you can think of it however you want. It's going to help it so the employee shortage won't be as bad, but also these people can focus on other things that might be a little
higher level.
Well, hopefully, but you know, who knows how the whole world will play out. I'm not going to say whether this is good or bad. I just know it's interesting and exciting and it makes sense.
My point was less on the labor market. My point was more that to do that work which you're doing, you need sort of really to access and think through a subject matter expertise. And the exciting thing is that GPT-3 with the prompts is able to take these subject matter expertise in some way, if you work on it, to learn that, sort of to not to learn it, but to connect to that. So that you can by making experiments to talk to subject matter experts, to become a subject matter expert yourself in some level, you can see how to phrase your prompts in order to get out that what you want.
Yes, but there's two things I'd say on that. One is, look, I'm actually a librarian, and I built taxonomies for years, and that means people think you have to have like, in certain areas you do, but really, you know, I built a 5,000 topic taxonomy. I had some folks help me. They were not domain experts, they were taxonomists. So there are people who are good at, like I'm sure you are, that are good at understanding new domains enough that you can do things like create a taxonomy or help people find information or whatever. So you don't really necessarily need that much domain expertise or any to do something that's domain specific. Now for this one, the subject line, this is the single thing that helped me. I got this from the domain experts, but I didn't talk with anybody about this in our company. I didn't like interview people and try to extract the domain knowledge, see how they do this work. What I got is a key slide here. Do you see this slide?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I did it. I read that and I translated as many of these things on the right, these different strategies, into prompts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, and then I did this. So then here, I think this is it. Yeah. So for example, there's a FUD. There's the output from the FUD examples for missing out or whatever. Here's the how-to. So how-to is another pattern from there. And I wrote a prompt that gives you how-to subject lines from the title of a document. Okay. And then I did subject line. I did questions. Phrase it as a question. And then I randomly selected from the 5. Okay. And then here they are. So for this title, where's the title? There's the title of the document.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then here are the ones I ended up with. Okay. But I did that by simply, you talk about domain expert. I just read this. I read the slide deck they gave me. I came upon this slide and I tried to write a prompt for each one of these and generate it. And then I randomly selected from those. And then I came up with this. And then that's it. So what you're saying is absolutely right, and sometimes it's more difficult.
It's not
more
as
complex
heavy as I make it sounded.
Yeah.
But if you wouldn't have, if subject matter experts wouldn't have written you that slide, then you couldn't create high quality output, because somewhere you need to know what works.
Yes, and in a sense you could think so. This is business process automation in a sense, right? And it's classic because you'll have an internal process that grew up over years, done by humans. They have PowerPoints, they have Word documents, they have training videos, they show how to do it. So you've got this shit practices codified right in front of your face, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in effect, I almost see this GPT-3 prompting stuff as a way of taking a liberal arts, interdisciplinary person like myself, having them take that business process, which is codified in document or artifact. GPT-3 makes it easy to then translate that into an NLP process, right? And then I could hand that off to NLP engineers to make it scale, right? But I'm like the nexus of all of this, the interdisciplinary guy. And GPT-3 is my right-hand man. And that makes it possible for me to do business process automation through the artifacts for that process, translate that through GPT-3 because it's not, you don't have to be an engineer to do that. Although I am not an engineer, but I'm a, you know, I am an experienced NLP practitioner and I write codes and stuff. But you don't even have to be like I am, right? You could be just a liberal, you know, a liberal arts kind of person, and then you codify that. You see what I'm saying? It's like a lingua franca to me between humans and the machines. And this is a very specific, explicit example of how that works, doing these subject lines.
So the value of GPT-3 which you get over here is less. The GPT-3 is amazingly intelligent, but your value which you get over here is that it has an extremely wide it has read a lot of things. So that if you can sort of if you give it specific instructions, specific for the type what you want to do, it has read this sort of, it has a wide enough background to provide the information or the text which you need. Sort of what I'm saying is that the value which you're creating comes from the breadth and depth of exposure of the GPT-3, less than to do something extremely exciting, which so you. I'm not sure. I'm just guessing, but okay. I'm excited. Just excited about the work you're doing.
One person explained it. I heard this woman talk about it. She says we put a lot of ourselves into our language, right? We put a lot of ourselves, our emotions. You could see it all there, and so it's just putting the next word. But there's a lot of us in it, so a lot of us comes out of it. That's the main thing. And what I've also learned is that bringing in external information, like documents or web pages, or like if you're talking, I've seen that Shapiro guy will show you how he does a dialogue. You can do chat with GPT-3. It's insane. You could do really good chat sessions. But what he's doing along the way is he does searches of Wikipedia and brings in, like he's doing a history chatbot, and he'll bring in text from outside as part of the prompt to generate the answer or the next question. So also bringing in the external language helps a lot. So, but let me ask, Mayank Srinivas, what do you guys think about this? I mean, it's like a completely different world from the stuff we usually talk about, right? In the Kaggle competitions and in, in a lot of this stuff. It's like, you guys have any thoughts on this? Is it so far removed from the work you guys do that it's never going to be useful? Or can you guys see connecting the dots in some way?
At a macro level, therein it's kind of what people have been talking about with respect to AI. If you read Kasparov, for example, even when he lost to whatever blew the machine and stuff, his point was it's not that will become all powerful, the machines will become, but it's the combination of humans directing the machines and working with it to achieve what you cannot do by yourself. Or, another analogy is in the industrial age, mechanical things human couldn't do, like cranes and all that kind of stuff, was amplifying our physical abilities. And what AI and stuff enables us to do is scale thought processes, which is kind of what the example that you've gone through illustrates, right? It's like you're scaling, like you said, your company's processes and stuff, and automating it and putting stuff together to make that happen. So I think in that sense, it's very, very aligned and probably would end up being in most of where GPT-3 gets, or those kinds of models get used. I mean, you could potentially, and I was curious, I mean, for example, whether you've heard of specific, talking of domains, whether, the models like GPT-3 have been specifically, again, customized for, say, legal docs or medical docs. And because the other thing that I've heard, but I haven't looked at in great detail, but something like what you're describing or attempting to do, I've also heard of people trying to go through medical docs in order to identify promising research areas by combining information from poring over or having GPT-like entities going through medical docs to then identify which domains seem most promising while also not being very actively explored. But all from language processing, I mean, from NLP. So I'm curious, although I haven't seen, the question for me would be, have you heard of, the two domains that jump to mind are legal and medical, which have large corpuses. I mean, legal is all text. Everything is written down, everything is handed down, you argue about words, everything is linked, language. Medicine less so in practice, but again, the research progresses by documenting and publishing papers and stuff, and it doesn't have, of course it has customized names and all that for drugs and chemicals, but so I was curious whether you've seen of GPT-3 which is kind of customized for any of those kinds of domains.
Yeah, I can't think of any. I mean, I think I've heard bits and pieces, but I don't have anything on hand. It's a really good question. It may be too early.
Yeah, but the general direction I would say is probably where technologically such models would prove to be the most useful is in being, like you said, assistance to humans to scale and or enhance the processes and mental capabilities that you can think of. And as, to add on to what Yaka was saying, to me, the GPT-3 thing, one is the depth. So the depth almost all models achieve, right? But it's also, I think, not just the breadth of what has been consumed, but also the tasks that it can do or trained on. And as that increases, I think your ability to put the pipelines together, in my mind, would increase, because the number of the greater the number of tasks that it can be good at, the more creative ways the task can be combined to actually accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Right. So from that perspective, to me, it seems like, if anything, today's tasks that as you scroll through, I was thinking that the tasks seem even now to be fairly limited. And, as those tasks get expanded, so when I say tasks, I mean, like sentence summarization, this, that, and we seem to think of these, I don't know, maybe there are by now 25 or in the tens, but if the tasks grow and the capabilities of what it can do grows, then I think the ways that can be combined explodes too.
Yeah, and so what you see out there is what's stable diffusion, big science. So they're catching up open source models on with this GPT-3 stuff, right? So
yeah,
and not all. So that's one thing I see. So actually, you could do some of this for free now. You just start with the paid one, and then you work your way back. But so you see more and more, they're getting bigger and bigger and more capable and more capable. And there's this huge open source race against the companies that's happening. And so more models and bigger models are becoming available for free that are becoming actually useful and capable. At the same time, there's all these players there's a couple players that have created their own GPT-3 models, and none of them are quite as good as OpenAI because the Instruct model, the one I showed you, is just heads and shoulders above the others. But what they're doing is they're building tasks on top of that. So Cohere has a structured few-shot learning classifier. So if you have like 10 topics or 5 that you want to classify documents to, you give it a couple of examples and then you ask it to classify one. the next one. And it works very well. And I think, so what I'm trying to say, I guess, is I think that that's going to keep happening, where you have these very traditional NLP tasks may start getting taken over by GPT-3, especially if it's got 90-something% accuracy and I don't need an engineer to do it. You know what I mean? Because there's so much more need for classification that's currently that's unsatisfied out there in the world of companies, right? And enterprises. And if I'm a marketer or something and I need to classify the incoming emails to these 3 types, and I can just go to Cohere and just do it, or wherever, and give it a couple of examples, 10 examples, and then it'll just do it and do it with 90-something% accuracy. I mean, that's not a highly complicated classification problem, right? Because it's a few number of classes. But I can start seeing it. And you look at that sentence thing I did, no period, sentence, separation. And so I think at a very basic NLP task level, as these things get bigger and faster and cheaper and more widely available, they're going to start, and even if they're not the top performers, which they may end up being, they're just going to be so easy to use, right? That they're
yeah. So I think,
yeah,
the combination of, and some of it is that you went through, I was just thinking, some of it is the feedback loop that creates, meaning by that, what I mean is, as you use these tools to create new tasks, you can feed that back as yet another task that the tool is now capable of doing with a reasonably good level of output that's applicable. And now that task becomes yet another task on the list of tasks that the tool is capable of. So you kind of start building, a portfolio that expands over time of the task that the tool originally started off being good at, but it gets customized, it gets broadened, it gets its own feedback loop fed into it, like you're doing with what you call training and stuff. But those kinds of things help the portfolio of basic tasks grow bigger, which in turn expands its applications and the creative ways they can be combined even more.
Yeah, and it will happen in healthcare and law, and probably already is, because those guys have enough money to, just train the predictor at least, right? Like do transformers, use the transformers library to train it to your domain. That final
but
task
even
layer.
more, I think that's where some of the other guys have heard of it, like maybe the model I've heard also. Eleuther AI, I think, is another one that does stuff, and to the extent, but they're committed to openness, and I think that openness is also extremely valuable, because to the extent, much like open source, to the extent that you allow the openness, then you can actually amplify or power up the feedback loop that I was talking about, because more people who use that will feed more tasks back to you, whereas if you protect it, then you're limiting it to what you originally trained for.
Yeah.
Whereas if you open it and completely leave it open, then your environment, if you will be in which people play, much like Hugging Face or Eleuther and stuff, will be much, much bigger in the long run.
Oh, and it is going that way. It's insane. I can't believe between DALL-E and GPT-3, the open source movements on those are just, I mean, look what happened, man. OpenAI just cut their prices in half September 1, right? That's why, because there's these big open source projects that are building their own models and making them available. So it's crazy. Yeah. But on a more micro level, can you envisage using any of this in your day-to-day practice? Or yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think it definitely opens up new avenues to explore, and how it can be relevant, and how it can, again, my background, some of it is in hardware, and some of the, I can begin to think even of, and people typically in order to understand how the hardware works, or even the specs before you design, you write a lot of specifications and things like that that actually get into details. And I think over time it would be great if tools like GPT-3, again, just speculating. The other thing I would love for, I don't know whether with the DALL-E and stuff, I haven't played with it, is whether there are tools that can abstract and understand diagrams, not pictures, but diagrams per se, right? So you give it a base set of symbols, and then it understands what a circuit diagram is, or what and able to extract that. And then if you can think of combining that with this kind of an approach, then
Dude,
the
Clip.
data
Oh my
that you can
God.
extract from it.
Oh my God, Clip. Did you see Sujit's Clip presentation with satellite images?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I haven't really spent too much time on it.
Immediately, I could see you could actually do what you're talking about, as long as you have captions. If you have enough circuit boards with captions, right? Or parts of circuit boards, the different components, that you could actually take an image of a whole, I don't know, you're talking about a schematic, but maybe I could even imagine an image of a whole circuit board, and it would be able to, you could then actually cut it up into pieces and have it identify the different parts. Like he did beaches, like he had these satellite photos. But anyway, so what you made me think about too is a training chatbot. You should see how GPT-3 can do chatbots. It's really amazing. And you could actually do a hardware schematic training chatbot where you're learning with a chatbot. I can imagine that actually possibly working. That's what you just made me think about when you were talking about,
Yeah, so things like that, which can make, make it be very practical and not far-fetched in terms of the applications.
Yeah, I think that like we're just a bunch of geek engineers, and really what's happening is the people who are taking these ideas and getting millions of dollars of funding right now. I mean, it's all over the place. There's companies that are built. Some of them are so simple. They're built only on prompts. They're just a layer on top of GPT prompting. And there's a ton of writing assistance tools now like this. Some of them are specialized for particular markets, and others. But there's just this whole gold rush out there for these kind of
I can
ideas.
imagine. So I think to your macro question of, do you see it? I mean, absolutely. I think that's probably the direction in which is the most practical direction, where these tools are tools, not all this AGI and generically, but, like you said, people who are not experts in generation of the tools, but in the process of using them and putting them together to solve a real problem they have in front of them, unrelated to how the tool was trained and all the ways that the transformers get interconnected and the probability and the math underlying it. Who cares? They just put the thing together to get the outputs they want and stack them in the way they want and create some task, which then boot up from there and solve the problems they need to do. So I think it is, in fact, probably, I would say, the most practical or most promising application in a sense. All the rest is fun for engineers, but not as much fun or not as much relevant. I mean, it's relevant still, because at the end of the day, building all this stuff is what eventually ends up helping solve real problems. But what you're talking about is solving the real problems with the help of these tools.
Yeah. Well, which is the position I'm in, because I'm not like in an engineering group. I'm in a product innovation group, and a small one at that, at a medium-sized company that's basically a marketing and publishing company. So I can't do those kind of things. No one's going to give me the time.
Yeah, no,
to build my own neural network. Yeah.
Yeah, it isn't the goal, right? I mean, in fact, the way, as I said, my view, having a lot of my prior experience was going through the whole, chip design microprocessor cycle, and I see the cycle repeating in AI. What I mean by that is, in the earlier days, in the very early days of actually designing transistors and stuff, you had to know the details of each of them in order to put them together and get them to do what you want. So companies like Intel and stuff, if you're an engineer there, you used to deal with, literal transistors, and you could only deal with 10 of them or 50 of them and so on and so forth. But over time, as the abstraction grew and as the tools grew, you got into, terms like LSI and VLSI. And so if you count the transistors that are there in today's chips, you tend to do blocks, and you don't even worry about what's inside of those blocks. Most engineers dealing with them today do not even understand that, and it's all stack of layers, and the people who do some of these gigantic things are just connecting blocks and making sure they all work together at the highest level. And to me, that same thing is repeating in a sense in AI, that at one point you would know about losses and, the math of the detail of which loss you use and stuff. But eventually where it's going to end up is the example you said of, here's GPT-3, or here are 3 other models, and here are the tasks you want it to do, and here's how you put the task together and configure and interact with it to create the app that you really care about.
Yeah.
I want at this point to add one detail over here. In order to achieve that, what you're talking about, like taking building blocks and connecting them together reliably, that's something with neural networks is traditionally difficult. And so when I saw that how Darren put together different steps, sort of simpler steps, and created an email from that by combining them, that's very interesting. Sort of once you get to the point where you can actually stack or pipeline different states of simpler or more focused or more specialized NLP tasks together and understand how to do that, then you can get to the point where you can actually use combinations and build bigger things. And I haven't seen a lot of that happening in the past. Maybe I'm not up to date, but for me, this is really exciting that Darren says that you can actually do that. You can use different stages and combine them together reliably and predictably.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think my point is,
I'm adding to your point. I'm not arguing against what you're saying. I'm saying for that to happen, to go from 10 transistors to building blocks and people joining them together, you need sort of to understand how you can reliably compose pieces. And so I'm thinking for that,
yeah.
But Darren is, for me, what Darren is doing right now is that he is combining different pieces and it works together reliably. That's somewhat more exciting to me than backpropagation, because that sort of shows that you sort of once you can reliably take building blocks and put them together, you open up the door to a tool expansion of combinatorial features, sort of to
yes, and in fact, what in the analogy I was drawing, I agree. Where we are at in this AI space is more of trying these out. And one thing I would comment on is, over time, to your point, Jacob, the thing that will begin to happen is today, Darren is doing that by himself, right, with custom code. I predict that in the future, there'll come up tools that will enable you to do what Darren is doing with custom code for set of tasks that you can. So the abstraction level will continue to rise up.
Sure. Now, what I'm saying over here is that as long as you cannot reliably compose different steps, then you will always need somebody to understand every piece. At the moment that you can build one building block, one piece of a process which works by itself, and it works together with the next step without being tightly coupled with it, then you can start to have an explosion of combinations. And that's
it'll end up being like all technologies. They get commoditized into applications, but then you have to have Deloitte and Touche come in, or Anderson or whoever they were. You have to have your consultants to customize it for your company. And then there's some that just do bespoke because it's so close to their business requirements. But what I think though is that we're at a historical turning point or milestone in AI with DALL-E and GPT-3, because the whole task is switching from engineering to design. I mean design in the most general sense of design, a very creative design thing. And what design means is you're taking the technology and you're placing it into a human context, a real human, like a TV set is an artifact that's been designed. It's a certain size, it's got buttons and all this kind of stuff. Anything that you're living with day to day has been designed and refined over years and years, your toaster, whatever. So that's a historical inflection point when you go from, and we can see it. It's not happened yet, right? But we can all sort of imagine that it's happening now, and maybe it is kind of. But it's going into basically the technology of AI is being diffused and infused into the human society, and that happens. And when that happens, where the locus of the most or the most activity that's happening sort of shifts from engineering to more of a design sort of thing, product design or artifact design kind of a thing. I mean, obviously there's still huge amounts of engineering to be done. It's not actually pulling away from that at all, right? Like everything's exploding now.
What you're saying is that you have, instead of engineering, you're doing design. You're saying that in addition to engineering, you do design, and that engineering, when I'm saying reliably encapsulate and reliably compose, that you're saying you can hide the engineering behind an API which is simple from the outside. So by having GPT-3, where you have a simple prompt, where you can say, and a designer can understand, write a question over here, get an answer over there, you can hide the engineering, that the engineering happens, but it's no longer visible. And then the whole world of what you call design can actually start to develop and take that engineering, apply to the specific use case, like you're saying, write a marketing email.
But the crazy thing is, at the same time, what's becoming fully mature is like this whole Transformers library, the book we're going through, and that's almost all about training on an ML model, right? And so that is actually just beginning to explode and being made even. So it's like in parallel, we're seeing the right when we first are at the apex or whatever of that first revolution, which is that Transformers revolution, becoming very available and all, even within the software world. And then at the same time, we're seeing this GPT-3 one, which is even more, is even different, completely different from that. And this design stuff. So anyway, this is all philosophical. But it was interesting too, Srinivas, to hear your specific use case with the schematics. Because when you start thinking broadly like this, but then you have a problem like that to solve, that's when it's really, really interesting. And you come up with really
and
good
you can combine, as they say, modalities and stuff, then it becomes, really even more powerful.
Yeah. All right, guys, anything else anyone wants to talk about? I spent an hour and 40 minutes. I'm sure the rest of us have.
It was really exciting. Really exciting.
Good. Well, I hope you guys, as you guys get the opportunity to do something with any of this, we can, I can learn from you guys too. Yeah. So in that way.
Yeah. Do you guys know the size of the model that, Darwin, the GPT-3 that we send the request to?
Yeah, 175 million, I think. I think it says on their homepage. OpenAI. 175 is it Are we at billions now? Frick, I can't remember now.
Yeah, it would probably be B.
Yeah, that's the number of parameters. I was hoping for the actual size in the on the disk.
Oh, right. I don't know what I did watch a video the other day where it showed you how to take the most. Geez, was it the Stable Diffusion guys? But how to take one of those.
Mayank, there are papers which estimate that. I went through them in hardware. If I find it somewhere, I'll post it on Slack. There are papers that have done the estimation because they want to predict how much hardware resources would be needed to do this kind of stuff. So there is the data is there somewhere. I remember having at least estimates of it. If I see it, I'll post it later.
And do they apply some sort of compression to the APIs to the models that we send the request to, or is it wholly FP32 based, full precision models that come right out of the training pipelines?
I'm not sure I totally understood the question. When you run a request on the Open AI API, is that what you're asking about?
Yep. The Darwin models that we, yeah.
Right. So I haven't done any fine tuning, so I don't have any Darwin models. Okay. So it's just running on their full model. However, what I don't understand is how the hell they're scaling the fine tuning. Because I can take 500 documents, feed them back in and get a fine-tuned model, right? Mm-hmm. And that fine-tuned model will be a lot more consistent, and then it's just there for me to use, and it doesn't cost me any more than their model. And they're doing this on scale. I have no idea what the heck they're doing, but that's definitely one of their secret sauces, right?
Yeah.
But I did see a video. This is a little sideways for what you're talking about. And all I do is I just have to select it in the playground or put it in my API call. So there's nothing for me they don't charge me for hosting it or anything at all. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, good question or comment or thought. When you said, isn't it, how they're handling it and stuff, isn't it simple for them to just adjust the weights with your data and the data that because so what I'm trying to get at is that shouldn't be very hard for them to do, because while the model is huge and the parameters, it's just a matter of adjusting the parameters with the comparatively trivial amount of data that you provide to them, right? Because compared to the data they originally trained on, the data that you're providing is like minuscule, I would imagine. And then all they have to do is take the huge weights they have. By huge, I mean the size of the weights, not, I mean the number of parameters they have, and then tweak them with the small amount of data that you provide when they fine tune. So that ought to be fairly trivial for them to do.
But if it is for 100 customers or for thousands of customers, then it becomes a ML ops scale challenge.
Yes, but for the scale of data infrastructure that these guys put in with the warehouse.
If they already trained the original training, then it's not so much more difficult to do that.
Yeah, to train the original models, they would have used resources that are several orders of magnitude of what. So they can probably run 100 of these in parallel to their original single training that they would have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I also saw a sort of related, I watched a video the other day on how you take one of these, like the largest one that's available on Hugging Face, and you can get it running in Colab. And they use this very simple distillation library, and it really barely reduced performance. So you actually can, look, the GPT-3 instruct model that's on there, you can't get that. Nobody's as good as that. But you can take one of these 175 billion parameter models that's the same size, and you can actually, you could run it in Colab by using distillation. So it's becoming more practical to run your own. Mike, do you have any other thoughts or how it connects to the work you do or anything like that?
Yeah. Too. The thing that you were saying about the 125 billion parameter model, we can train it. We can get a compatible model from Hugging Face and run it on Colab. But that's I think so for the T5X extra large, it's 6 gigs. But I think so for the GPT-3 models, they may be in the size of hundreds of gigs.
Does it say on Hugging Face on their model repository? Like,
yeah.
I'm looking right now. What is it?
Yeah. For if you look at the GPT-2 extra large, it's 5 point something gigs.
Is that memory you're saying?
Yeah, the size on the disk.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Stable Diffusion version 1.4. Right, but it's memory that really is going to be your limiting factor, right?
Yeah, so the model, I Googled it, is about 350 gig.
On disk?
Yeah.
So what does that say about memory?
They probably bring in fractions. They don't kind of all store it. It just says, I just quickly Googled and it said that the largest variant of GPT-3 is 175 billion parameters, which takes up 350 gigabytes of space. Meaning that dozens of GPUs will be needed to just run it and many more would be needed to train it. And for comparison, GPT-2 is 40 gigs.
Nice.
Yeah.
That gives us a great comparison between the Hugging Face font. I think so. That's some sort of compressed model that they use. That's the largest size that they have is 5.6 gigs, the GPT-2 one. And it's saying versus the 40 gigs that comes straight out of training. So there must be some kind of compression technique that they use. Cool.
All right, guys, anything else anyone wants to bring up before we call it a call?
Thanks. That was very interesting.
And nice lead in, because what are we talking about next time? Scaling, right? Isn't that the next chapter? All right. So talk to you all next week.
Thank you very much. This was really exciting introduction to using this in a practical way, and makes this much more interesting, the whole topic, to actually see it applied.
Excellent. I'm glad to be able to share with you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
All right, bye.